that you're working on, or like something that you completely screwed up and you want to like show it off and warn people, you can send your photos to SAS, or show and share, at knoxmakers.org, and we will contact you and get you set up on and show you how to use this platform and all this and whatnot, and get you on the schedule for next week or whenever week you're free. But tonight we have a variety of people, and we are starting with Tim with some astrophotography. Tim. Hello, Tim.
Hello?
Hi. And there's your camera.
Okay, so back in 2017, whenever we had the big eclipse that passed over us, um, everybody had come over to my house because it was practically going right overhead. It was one of the longest periods of the totality. So I'd gotten a fairly cheap camera lens, and after a series of lackluster photos leading up to the eclipse, where I found out that you really have to have something that can actually track the sun, not just a tripod and a camera, because it will meet me across the sky like you wouldn't believe whenever you're trying to get a picture. So this was whenever it had just started the totality, and this was before I remembered that I had to take the solar filter off. If you'd advance the next slide, please. And that's after I remembered to take the solar filter off.
That's awesome.
So that was the one photo that I was like, awesome. I'm extremely happy with that. My wife even actually framed it later for me.
Yes, that's totally the wallpaper shot.
Yeah, so I was super pleased about that. And then we had some other things that have happened over the years. If you can advance the slide. I ended up getting a telescope that one of the last two photos in the series will show you. I found it on Goodwill's website. They actually have an auction site, believe it or not. And this thing was like $125 for a nearly $600 computerized telescope.
Nice.
And it shipped for $30, and it was probably 50 pounds. It was just insane, the shipping. But this is a picture of Uranus that I took a couple of years after I did the eclipse photo. And you can advance again. And that's one of Saturn on the same telescope that I took about 2 months ago. And you can advance it one more time. This is the Mercury transit from last year and a time lapse that I did because I upped my game and I bought a nice star tracker and got a better lens for my camera. And this was the entire event. The dots are actually Mercury on the sun as it goes across the line from the point where it started to the point that it ended. I used all of the photos that I'd taken, probably nearly 200 photos, and stacked it together so that you could actually see it going all the way across the sun.
That looks so good. What kind of filter do you have to use for the sun?
There are actual solar filters. I can't remember the specific name of them, but the one that I got is basically just a big sheet of the material, and then I 3D printed an adapter that would fit on the end of my telescope, and just wedged the thing in there. Because if you just point your camera or your telescope or whatever at the sun, and you got any kind of a either film or digital receiver on the other end, it'll burn it up within about 5 minutes. But with this thing, it can take pictures like this all day long. My sister-in-law's husband, he came down for the eclipse, and he had a filter that was actually turned the sun green. So afterwards, whenever we compared our shots going up through the totality, all of his sun shots were actually green, like a welding helmet, and mine were orange, like the sun. So I think he actually got a welding solar filter for his, and I picked up one from the same people who sold the glasses and whatnot. But it's like a piece of paper that would go around your lens, and the center of it had the special material in it. And of course, you just have to make sure that everything on it's not got any holes or scratches, or the same thing can happen. You'll just get one super bright spot, and that'll be the end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's really great photography.
Thank you. The camera that I was taking to answer Isaac's, this is a Nikon D5200. doing this. Of course, I found that out after I got the Nikon, um, because you can take the infrared filter off of the Canon much easier, and then you can put different filters back on them. So if you live in areas of light pollution, then you can actually get filters which will filter out the street lamps and things like that to an extent. So even here, you'd be able to actually get potentially a picture of the Milky Way. Where here, if you go outside at night, all you can see is a handful of stars, and that's about it. But if you drive 3 hours to a dark sky location, or if you go to Harriman, they actually have an observatory that on the, at least they used to, on the third Saturday of every month, you can go and bring your equipment set up and take photos all night long if you want to. I don't know if they still do it with the COVID stuff, because I've not tried in the last few months, but that's a really great place to go.
That's cool. We should do a field trip there sometime.
Oh yeah, it's great fun, and the full-on observatory is super nice. There's just all kinds of people that are set up all over the place up on top there. It once you hit Harriman, it's probably about another hour to get up to this particular site, and it's high elevation, so you don't have anything blocking your shots or anything else, and it's not complete black. I want to say on the Bartell scale, it's around 2, and here in the North City, we're at borderline 4 and 5. So that's the scale that tells you how much light pollution you got. So lower is better, and like in New York, you're at a 10, and you pretty much can't see anything but the haze caused by the city lights at that point.
Right.
Advance the slide, please. And that is Jupiter that I took last week when it had reached its point of opposition to the Earth. So that's the most bright that it will be for several more months, basically, actually years, until it reaches a point again where you can do it the same telescope that I'd taken the other stuff with.
Nice.
And if you can advance it one more time. There should have been one more photo I may have gotten out of.
That's it?
Okay, that's all the photos. Well, I guess that I didn't get them. I did get a comet photo, and I'll stick that up on the.
Sorry.
I'll stick that up in the Mattermost. But the green thing sitting on top of the tripod, the white and green thing, that is a star tracker, and with it, you can get it polar aligned on the North Star, and once you've done that, it will stay on whatever you pointed at, matching the rotation of the Earth, so that it will basically allow you to get extremely long exposure shots of whatever you want. And without it, you can't do anything, because by the time you get everything lined up, it's moved. And then the next photo, that's the telescope that I got off of Goodwill's website. The only thing that it was missing was the little red dot looking sight that's on the side of it, which is how you point it at a star, and the little thing on top where you see the little white piece of plastic, that was missing. But just above it, on the very top where that black round cap is, that's actually where you attach your camera to it if you want to.
Nice.
And the little white thing is where you would stick the viewfinders if you wanted to actually look through it. It's got a switch on the side which switches back and forth between the two outputs for your camera or your viewfinder, and it came with like every single lens and a bunch of filters for the viewfinder too. So it was like a fantastic deal. If you ever want to find something good, go to the shopgoodwill.com. They have a lot of stuff.
They have a lot of cool stuff there. Very
I'll,
nice.
I'll get the picture of Neowise up, because I took like 5 days trying to get it, and it was cloud cover every single night, and I went out one time at just about 11:30 and found one place here in the North City where there's no light, skies are nice and dark, and I barely caught it right above the horizon line.
Nice.
So,
very cool.
and yeah,
Thank
not
you.
by Goodwill, but it's a good thing.
Right? It is a good site. Thank you very much. That was really a nice, that was not a normal making show and share, but I really was excited. I'm glad you showed that. I like seeing photography on here, especially space.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot of fun. It's just time consuming because you can spend an entire night trying to get photos, and then you get home and you don't have a photo.
Right.
You just got a whole bunch of almost photos.
Blobs.
Yeah. Oh, and there's even software which it allows you to stack like 50 photos on top of each other, and it looks for differences in the details of them. And it's actually open source software. These astrophotographers have just made it themselves, and it will look at all the different pixels of every single photo that you stack because it's assuming that they're basically the same photo in every one of them. But if it sees clouds, it'll erase them. If it sees, different imperfections on it, you can tell it what you want it basically to take out by it showing you all the different things that it can do. And then, of course, it takes a long time in post-processing to do it. You can spend 3 hours trying to post-process all that.
Who's
So
all
it
the
gets rid of all of the garbage, so to speak, and then it also takes all of the best photos of all the stars and imposes them on top of each other so that it makes it brighter. There's a guy on YouTube, I can't remember exactly what channel he is, but it's Big Astro Backyard, I think is what it is. And he actually shows how to use this, and he showed a picture that at first you hardly saw anything on it. After he ran it through all the filters, and you can see the nebulous reds and blues and all the different things that would be there if you were able to actually see it just with your naked eye. But you couldn't see any of that in the first photos, and it took him 50 photos in order to get that.
That's really cool. You should link to that software as well.
Yep, I can do that.
All right.
And if anybody ever wants to see what the night sky really looks like, take a cruise.
No kidding. Yeah.
Because whenever we were out there and you could actually see the stars, you're just like, okay, this doesn't look normal.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome. And that's it.
Thanks. Next we have Isaac. With more speaker upgrades.
Hello, friends.
Hello, Isaac.
This is sort of also on the topic of thinking you have photos and then not having them. Because I had a little issue with my smartphone, and as a result, you'll have to put up with my sketches rather than actual photos this week. But a couple of weeks ago, I was talking about doing sound deadening in my girlfriend's car in preparation to upgrading the stereo system. And since then, I have had the opportunity to install some speakers. You would advance the slide for me, please. Sometimes people may ask, what is the difference between the speakers that you're replacing and these fancy new ones, right? So the speakers that you get in your car ordinarily are pretty janky. They are, of course, oriented towards being manufactured as cheaply as possible. And so there are several aspects of a speaker that are important for good quality sound. The cone itself, which is the thing that's moving the air, is important. In a cheap one, it'll just be like plain paper, which deflects easily and does not reliably reproduce the sound well. A nice speaker would have something like a composite cone. The surround here, which is what actually couples the moving cone to the static chassis, should be something durable and reasonably thick. It certainly is not in the cheap speaker you get by default. And then the chassis itself would ideally be made of like a cast metal, like this one is, as opposed to being cheap injection molded plastic. But most importantly, in my view, is the magnet. So on the back, you'll have a large permanent magnet, at least ideally, which serves to oppose the electromagnetic field created by the voice coil. So I think you have to have a pretty nice big magnet on the back to be able to do what a speaker does. And on the factory one, you don't get that. You get a tiny, cheap, janky magnet. So that's the motivation for replacing the speakers, to try and get a broader range of frequencies that can be reproduced reliably, and to do so more precisely. So next drawing, please. So the first problem that I had was, and this is inside the door skin. So this is not the part that you see, of course, but you take the cosmetic skin off of the door and you see the metal that the door is made of. And because of the stupid factory speaker, which had this sort of integral plastic mount with one bolt and a couple of little prongs, then I'm left with this hole that's not even round, for crying out loud. Well, speakers are round, or at least they're supposed to be. So the first thing I had to do was pay a little visit with Mr. Jigsaw. That is not difficult to do. The sheet metal is relatively thin. In fact, it's almost too thin. You have to be careful that you don't deform it too much when you're cutting it. And of course, also, you have to create a diversion when you're going to saw a hole in your girlfriend's car that she loves very much. Next drawing, please. Well, after you've rounded it out, then the next problem you've got, and this is very hand-wavy, but basically there's stuff inside the door. And you have to make sure that when you put the new speaker in there, it's not going to mechanically interfere with the movement of the window or anything else. And so this new speaker, what with its superior motor structure, was definitely too deep to mount directly into the door. So we've got to resolve that next. Next drawing, please. So the answer is to make spacer rings, which will then pull the speaker slightly out of the door and ensure clearance in behind. And MDF, the medium density fiberboard, that's the material that I like to use for making things like spacer rings. Because it is so dense, it is not prone to vibrating or introducing any sort of noise, which is nice. And also because it's a manufactured material like that, you can almost machine it into a precise shape. Now, in the bad old days, this was also an opportunity for Mr. Jigsaw to come into play, and I made some pretty janky looking spacer rings. But since then, I've gotten a router and a circle jig, so I can make very pretty, nice round rings, which are much more pleasing. Of course, you also have to make holes through the ring that correspond to the mounting holes of your new speaker. So you got to mark that carefully, and then I'll pull out my very embarrassing drill press that still is able to make a hole that is quite perpendicular to the surface, which I can't do by hand. So make these spacer rings. 3/4 of an inch is turned out to be the right size for this, but you have to do some kind of careful measuring and experimenting to see just exactly how much space there is, because you want everything to match up once you get done. Next drawing, please. Of course, the old speaker was connected by some goofball connector that only Honda has ever heard of before, so you're going to have to cut that dude off. And the wire there was just long enough to reach the original speaker, so it was necessary to extend the wires so they could match up to a new speaker. This is always an opportunity for me to point out that you should solder and use heat shrink, because in an automotive environment, you have tremendous vibration, and inside the door, there's a possibility that there could be some moisture in there as well. And so a mechanical press fit connection, like a crimp terminal, I think is a poor choice, particularly when you want something to be trouble-free and to sound really good for many years to come. Next drawing, please. So this step was an opportunity to use some Knox maker's knowledge, a material that Billy turned me on to. I don't know the proper name for it, but it's a wonderful double-sided sticky tape. It's like if duct tape was sticky on both sides and didn't have any fibers in it, so it was stretchy also. It is magic. I think it's intended to stick down a material that you're going to CNC machine or something. But now that I know it exists and I have some, I find it's good for all kinds of things. And so in this case, what I did was put it on the back of my new spacer ring so that I could carefully position it on the door, and then it would be held on quite securely while I use a center punch to transfer the holes onto the sheet metal. Now the step of actually positioning the ring is a little bit fiddly here, because it's got the goofy slots, and I've already had at it with a jigsaw, so there's not as much metal there as you want there to be, and you want to make the most use of it. So you try and balance out so the holes, have as much perimeter around them as you can manage. Next slide, please. This is the part that pleased me the most about this speaker install, because it's something I've never done before. It's always a challenge to fasten something to the door because it's thin sheet metal, and so you can't tap threads into it. How are you going to achieve that? And there's a number of solutions people use on the internet that are not very satisfying. But I learned about and got a new tool, which is always a happy time. This thing is very much like the tool that you use to set pop rivets, except instead of rivets, what you're actually setting is threaded inserts. And so I bought a selection of threaded inserts, and all you got to do is just drill the hole alarmingly large and then put the insert in, and then this tool sort of pulls it from the front so as to compress it on the opposite side. It mushrooms out and basically becomes part of the metal. And so now all of a sudden we've got these beautiful threaded holes that will perfectly receive bolts later, which is good times. So that was a very satisfying addition to this process. Next slide, please. So now I just need to mate the wires up with the new speaker. Important step, passing the wire through the spacer ring. Why do you suppose I thought to mention that? No, I didn't make that mistake on this car, but I did on previous cars, and it certainly left an impression. So you want to make sure that you only have to do the soldering once. And again, I'm recommending soldering rather than conventional print terminals. You know, it's more bulletproof. I think it sounds nice. And of course, this is an opportunity to pull out the TS1000 soldering iron. This will do right here, which I absolutely adore because it is a temperature-controlled soldering iron that is tiny. So you can carry it out there to the car where you're working, and you don't have to bring your whole soldering station out there, but you can still do a beautiful soldering job. Very pleasing. Next slide, please. So now you can bolt everything together, and the speaker looks dope in the door, and you're super excited about hearing it, but there's one more step that I think is worth doing, and that is to take some closed-cell foam and cut strips that you can staple sort of sideways into that MDF spacer ring. And the purpose of this is that the door skin has got, you know, these vents cut into it that allow the air to move back and forth as the speaker is in motion. But once that door skin comes on over the speaker and the speaker starts to move, it's less work for it to move the air sideways inside the door. That would be a waste of your beautiful sound, and it could also lead to vibration. So what we want to do instead is to use this foam to create kind of a baffle that will mate to the door skin and ensure that the airspace is sort of one with the cabin where you're actually sitting. So that's an easy thing to do to improve your sound quality. And so that's it. That's all the steps involved. It takes longer than you want it to, particularly if you've never done it before. It seems like it'd be more straightforward than that, but the result is a beautiful thing, and those speakers sound real fine, certainly better than they did before. And that's what I did recently.
There was one question in the chat. Dee Dee asked if the metal frame really needs to be cast, or is stamped metal just as good?
I don't know if it's just as good. It probably is. I mean, in this case, we're talking about the speakers that go in like the front doors of a vehicle. So those are going to be what are referred to as the mid-range, literally playing the middle of the audio spectrum. So they're not going to try and play the deep bass notes, but they are responsible for a very important area where a lot of music happens. And particularly if you're listening to pop music, which is what my girlfriend likes the best, most of the bass line and stuff happens in that range because most cars don't have subwoofers. So we do want this thing to be able to play low as credibly as possible. So I definitely want as rigid a chassis as possible in the speaker. A lot of nice speakers do use stamped metal, though. I think as long as it's metal, you're probably good to go. But the cast ones are even nicer.
And Joe was asking what the tool was that you got. What is it called again?
Gee, I don't know. It's got this manual that is sort of like English. It seems to refer to itself as a riveter, but these are not rivets that I'm putting in there. I'll be glad to post a link to the specific thing that I bought. I'll tell you honestly, I got one that's pretty cheap, and it got the job done, but I already kind of wish I had spent a little bit more money for a nicer one, as much as I enjoy putting in threaded inserts. So I may revisit that, but I'll be glad to post that on the chat server.
Oh, it looks like Rob also posted a link to Amazon.
I'm sure that's at least as good as what I picked out. Right. Well, that's it for me this week then.
Cool. Thank you, Isaac. I like your drawings. I think all your slides from now on for the rest of your life should be drawings instead of photographs.
Probably not. That's a little time consuming, but thank you.
It's worth it, though. Next up, we have Joe with a motorcycle. Hello, Joe. Hi. How are you today?
Huh?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. This is a project I worked on about 5 years ago. I bought this motorcycle. It's a 1972 Honda CL350. And it's got some problems, so I brought it home and determined I would rebuild it. So next slide, please. Here's where I took it apart. Back when I did this, I wasn't in the habit of taking many pictures. So I'm going to have to describe some of what I did, and you'll have to use your imagination. And so what I did to the motor was I did a top-end rebuild, which is I took the head off and the cylinders off, put in new rings, honed the cylinders. I ground the valves so they would seat properly. There was a chain tensioner that the chain turns the camshaft. It was messed up, so I fixed that. And of course, all new gaskets through the engine. And then there was a bolt broken off in the head. And I tried and tried to get that bolt out, and I couldn't do it. So I had to get on the eBay and get another head. It came from Missouri. So that's how I rebuilt the engine, and I don't have any pictures of it. I wish I had. It's a beautiful thing to see, a carburetor laid out all over a table. So next slide. This is the electrical part. This is what I started with. Pretty complicated, and you just can't really figure that out. So I studied it for a long time and came up with this. Show the next slide. That. I simplified the wiring a little bit, but I also just rearranged it so I could understand it. And so this is what I ended up on the wiring. And the wiring is all stock, except I did take out the points and condenser and put in an electronic ignition. So, well, it's not all stock, but it's mostly stock. And then, so the next picture, okay, you can see behind the battery that blue box. That's the electronic ignition. Right, that's it. And it seems to be working really good. I'm happy with it. So, next slide. This is part of the front end rebuild. I did the bearings and the triple tree. I had to replace the triple tree because it had a part broken off of it. I rebuilt the front forks. I've got more pictures of, or the shocks. I've got more pictures of that in a minute. And front tire, you can see I'm balancing it and getting it trued up so it's straight. Next slide. This is the rear wheel. It had some broken spokes. So I just replaced all of the spokes. And then after you do that, next slide, you have to balance it and true it so it's straight. So I had to do all that. Next slide. Okay, there's a picture of the front forks when I first took them all apart. So, next slide. I put this in because you can see this big gob of wires right in the front.
Right here?
Yeah, that's all in the headlight. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
It's a mess. So, you know, I had to get a chair and put it right there in front of the bike and just work on it for a long time. So it was time consuming. So next slide. Wow. This is the finished product. You can see the rear sprocket is clean because that got replaced along with the front one. So I got it all back together and it runs.
Nice. Success.
Yeah, I was real pleased about that. There's one thing I've got to yet to get resolved, and one of the exhaust pipes, you see there's two going horizontal there. The lower one has a hole in it about the size of a nickel. Mm. And I tried to put that epoxy on there with a patch, and that fell off. So I need to get that repaired somehow, welded, I guess, but the metal is very thin, and I don't know how to do that. I'm going to have to find somebody that knows how. You can't, this is an original pipe. You can't buy these anymore. So I can't just replace it. If you found one that wasn't used, it would be like $2,000. But You know, you can find them on eBay used, but these pipes are better than anything on eBay. So I've got that going for me.
It looks so good, so shiny.
Yeah, I've had one problem with it since then. I haven't got around to troubleshooting it, but the left spark plug went out on me, and so I replaced it, and it went out again. So there's something going on there that causes spark plug to go out. I read that if the spark plug isn't screwed in tight enough, it can have blow by and overheat and go bad, but I don't think that's it. So I don't know. Maybe it's the electronics or something. I'm not sure. So that's a mystery.
The next project.
Yeah, you know, once you get to a point on these projects like this, you just don't want to deal with it anymore. You just kind of get over it. It's hard to go back.
It looks really good. I'm impressed. You should bring it to the space someday when we're allowed to like see each other in person again.
Yeah, sure. Maybe I will. It's not by any means show quality, you know, where you could expect.
Looks good to me.
Where it's got dents in it and paint chipped off, but you know, mechanically it's really good.
Mm-hmm. Very, very nice. Thank you.
Okay.
Next up we have John Dale with engraving.
Hello, everybody. Guess what I'm doing? So my neighbor was given a bunch of wood from a family barn that was torn down from one of his friends, and so as he was really excited about the wood and wanted to do something for them in exchange for giving him the wood, and so he decided to make this for their son, and he wanted me to engrave his son's name and his football number on it. He played football. And so this is like the most nervous thing I feel like I can do, because you know, it's not something you can just buy and replace if you mess it up, right? And so you know, it means something to someone, and it's harder to replace. So I spent a lot of time on this, making sure that it was really aligned and the results were really good. And so this is what he brought to me. I think he used a bandsaw to cut out Tennessee, and then gave it to me and asked me if I could engrave on it. So in order to draw it up and align on it, I first put it down like this and took a picture. I thought about using the ruler in the picture to try to get the size, but ultimately I just drew it up and then measured it to scale to the right size. So if you go to the next picture, I just brought the image into Inkscape. Does Inkscape count as drawing? This is drawing night, right? So I brought it into Inkscape and just did an outline. You can tell that I didn't go crazy on the details of the edges. I'm just basically getting an outline so that I can make the letters and everything inside it look right. So if this were like a machining project or something, I would like go into much more detail, but this, I'm just aligning the letters and the logo on it. So you go to the next one. So I went out on the internet and found a nice sportsy font, and then drew it in the middle, and that's the logo of his school and his number, and put that on there as well. I kind of had to trace that one. I couldn't find a good vector file for that, and so, but I found a bitmap image of it and just sort of traced it and put it on there. And so I've got the outline now, and I've got this in there. I've got it just kind of visually centered where it looks right. It wasn't actually centered, because I find when shapes aren't square or rectangle and you center them properly, it doesn't look right. So just kind of visually centered based on the weight of the area of the Tennessee. So if you go to the next one. So at that point I cut it out. I just some plywood and engraved it. I was testing the engraving, and I came across a problem. My engraving kept having some issues. I don't know if you can tell in this picture, but it's like it wasn't very even, and it was very light. Yeah, and I think if you zoom back out and go to the next picture, I think it's a zoomed in picture of it too. So if you go to the next picture, yeah. So there's a bug in the firmware of my laser that I've kind of ran across a few times before. This was I just filled these letters with hatch fill, and so it was vector lines, and I kept running across this problem. Everywhere it went from like short to long, or maybe it was long to short line, it just kind of skipped a line. And so if you go to the next one. And so I decided to switch. I'm just going to raster it, right, instead of vector engrave it. And so you can kind of see on the left there, that was the vector of the seed. And then I just exported it as a ping and then inserted it in there, and I was going to raster it. And that came out really well. I also wanted it to be darker, and with lasers, when you want it to be darker, you don't increase the power, you slow it down, right? So slowing down makes it darker, increasing the power makes it deeper in the engraving. So I slowed it down, I switched to raster, and it turned out, I think, really nice. So go to the next one. So the next problem was, well, then how do I put this on the bed of the laser and make sure it's actually lined up? And so I removed the honeycomb. I wasn't cutting anything. I was just engraving. And so I removed the honeycomb and then put a piece of scrap down and just sort of engraved the outline. You can see how thick the outline is in this because it was so far down. It was way out of focus. But I just put a piece of scrap down and I engraved the outline, and that way I could just put the piece down and on there, and everything would be aligned. Well, my laser at home doesn't have a Z table, so I removed the honeycomb, and it gave me more depth. And then this would allow me to just set the piece on top of there, properly aligned, and then I can do my raster engraving there. So if you go to the next one. So there's the final product. I was even at this point, I was really nervous that I was going to mess it up, and so I asked him if he had any other wood that he could do in the same shape, and I would do it. So the top one is the scrap piece. I think it was like a pine or something. But I was really interested in how the difference of the two different types of wood. I think the bottom one's like a red oak or something, and the top one is a pine. These are the exact same settings and same speed and everything. And the top one came in lighter, but also, I don't know if you can zoom into the top one, but you can see the grain in that wood. It was softer in parts of the grain where it was not in the other one. So if you ran your finger over there, it was like wavy in the bottom of that. So that was really interesting. But then I think it turned out really nice in the bottom one. So he was excited, and I was relieved that it turned out nice. So this is hanging on some kid's wall now. So
Nice.
that's it.
Is it a picture of the real final one? No.
I mean, that's the bottom one. The bottom one is the real final one.
Okay. I thought they were both practice, but yeah, it looks
No.
really good. I do like how you can see the grain even in the letters. That's really neat.
Yeah, it surprised me. I wasn't expecting it, but the wood was so soft in parts that it just kind of, the same intensity pushed down further in other parts than it did in other parts.
You said it was O, right?
The bottom one was the red oak. It was harder, and the top one was the soft pine, I think.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
And last up, we have Andrew Messersmith, who is going to do our very first live show and share. Maybe our first? I don't know. He's going to do a live demo of making a nail for us. So, if you want, you can make him full screen by like clicking in this area of his picture, his video. There's like the arrow sticking out, and also we can't hear you, Andrew. No. I'll just describe what you're doing.
Hello.
There you go. There you are.
All right. So last time we did a test of this, I would just bomb out every 15 minutes or so. So we're gonna hope that a fresh browser install with no plugins or anything is going to resolve it. And here we go. Hi, I'm Andrew. Welcome to my blacksmithing shop. This is a really old building that came with the house that we actually didn't really even know it was here until like days before we closed, because it was so overgrown with kudzu and winterberry or winter creeper. It's some, similar deal. Imported terribleness that never goes away. Anyway, so for the last, 5 years or so, I've built it out and been using it as a blacksmithing shop. So we are going to go through a real quick process of heating up a piece of steel here and making a nail. So I don't know if you guys can see that or not. So this is a piece of 1/4-inch square rod. In order to get it hot, and I've already done some amount of work already, we built a fire using anthracite coal. Well, this is coal has like a process that it goes through, and it's kind of bituminous and kind of anthracite right now. Like this is like a pretty hard bituminous coal. So anyway, we have a fire started already. So what I'm going to do is incorporate a little bit of air into it by cranking this crank here. This crank is attached to a impeller that blows atmosphere into the forge via that pipe that runs right along there and up into the fire pot. So if you look over there, you can see that the coal's starting to glow a little bit hotter, a little bit brighter, which is exactly what we want it to do. This is a fairly small piece of coal, or a piece of steel, so it'll heat up pretty quickly here. So we're going to do this process in a couple steps. The first one is we're going to taper a point onto that, and we're going to use the face of the anvil for that, and this hammer. So assuming this is hot now, which it surely is, we will get started on that. So we're going to taper a point. I'm just whacking on 2 separate sides because the anvil hits back. So I don't need to run all the way around the thing until the very last couple of licks when I can center it up. I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but that's got a nice little point on it there. That's the start of the shank of our nail. Throw that back in the fire here, and we'll, like I said, take this nice and slow so I can talk while I'm doing it. The next process that we're going to do is to cut a, we'll cut the head is what we're going to do. So I'm going to use a hardy tool. This hole in the anvil here, the square one, is called the hardy hole. And so tools that go in it are hardy tools. This is a hot cut. It's designed to be used on hot steel. They make a cold cut that is much more blunt than this. But this one has a taper on the bottom, so it actually fits in there, and once you give it one whack, it'll lock into there, which makes it a lot more reliable tool, so it doesn't bounce around.
Is it very sharp?
No, not really. I mean, you're never going to cut yourself with it, and it doesn't need to be because it's cutting hot steel, but it's got a pretty decent point on it for what we're going to do. That design right there with the locking shank was designed by a gentleman named Brian Brazil. There was some concerns from folks that something like that locks into the anvil would end up splitting your anvil apart. So far, I haven't seen anything. That was only speculation. So we're going to go ahead and walk this around that hot cut there. And I don't know if you can see that or not. We've now knocked that all the way around, right? So that's now fairly loose, pretty easy. We'll be able to just snap that off once we heat it back up again. So I'm going to give this a whack on both sides, and that loosens it back up out of that hole, and then we put it back where it belongs in the holster there. And it goes back in the fire. This bellows has an impeller that's made out of cast iron, so it's pretty heavy. And so you just give it a couple of turns to get it up to speed, and it'll sit there and spin for you for, 30 seconds or so, which is plenty. You don't need a ton of oxygen, especially for a piece of steel this small. So the next tool we're going to use is this guy right here. This is called a nail header. So I built this. It's pretty simple. All you do is punch a square hole through it, and once you get that punch through, then you take a ball punch on the backside and upset it back the other way, and that opens up that hole just a little bit. So you end up with a hole that is slightly tapered, and so the corners of that have a peak, and that between the peak and the taper, that allows the nail to be released after you get done heading it. If you have a lot of surface contact right there, then what you'll end up doing is just riveting the nail into the header, and then you just have a full piece of steel again, which isn't the goal. So we're gonna pull this guy out of here. Switch over the cameras. This goes inside there, just like that. We bend it over 90 and then spin it. It'll break right off. And then we throw that into the Pritchett hole, and we head that down. I'm going to pretty this one up a little bit, so I'm going to do what's called a 5-clot. So what I've done there is I've hit on the all four corners and then knocked the peak down a little bit. It's kind of like a pyramid that's been knocked down. And it dresses it up just a little bit, because if you're going to go through the effort of making a nail this way, you might as well make a nice one. So let me grab a little bit of water here.
Sue has a question. She was wondering about your table that the coal is on. What is it made out of, and how are you not melting it?
So that's made out of a piece of 5/8 inch steel. So it's a pretty beefy boy. And it's not melting for a couple reasons. One, because the way the fire pot, I don't know if I can show you this or not, but the way the fire pot is designed, just the rim of it is actually sitting into, kind of like a sink, right? So just the rim is sitting into the metal plate. So there's actually not a ton of surface contact between the table and the fire pot, which means that you don't transfer very much heat. Steel is like a pretty crappy conductor, all things considered, like compared to, copper or aluminum or something like that. Steel transfers heat really, really slowly. So while the table will heat up after, a couple hours, it never gets anywhere near hot enough to actually melt. And what we're doing also is, it's hard to get steel up to a temperature to melt anyway. So like, that piece of 1/4 inch would have to be directly in the fire in order for that to happen. So this thing is cooled off now, and I can show you guys what it looks like. Maybe if that wants to go. And then the head obviously has those facets on it, which kind of gussers it up a little bit.
Joe is asking about your exhaust fan.
So the draft is caused by the stack effect, which is a known phenomenon at chimneys. So basically, what happens is this is a side draft forge. So the forge, the fire pot sits over here. It heats up. As it heats up, some of that heat gets blown into the chimney here. This is an old water tank that I cut the hole in the bottom of and then opened up the side of there. So that heat starts to build up in there, and what happens is you end up with pulling a draft from that, which causes more heat to pull in there, and this starts, like the water tank itself is pretty thick walled, so it'll start to heat up as well. So everything together creates a draft that sucks all that smoke and stuff out. It's every so often, if you're starting it and it's a little bit windy outside, you need to prime it. So you can just take a bunch of newspaper, bundle up, and throw it into the chimney before you start your fire if you want to. But on a day like today, which is crazy still and normal, you just let it go and it'll do its thing.
Did you make all the nails for the blacksmithing building?
Yeah, every single one of them was hand forged.
Are there any nails on the blacksmithing building?
Yeah, there are nails in the blacksmithing building. There's no hand forged nails in the blacksmithing building.
Oh.
I'm halfway tempted to make this like part of one of the intro classes, and we'll just have like a plank with everybody's name and their nail
I think
on the
we
wall.
should.
So,
Then
yeah.
you that's like how your pass on how to get access to the building. You have to make a nail
Yeah.
that holds something up. Maybe that's too much. Maybe that's asking for too much.
Yeah, we could make a bigger nail, and then it could be like a coat hook as well. or something like that. But I feel like at some point, like 30 coat hooks is maybe we'll start collecting up way too many. That's how to make a nail real quick. I'm gonna run through one more time and try and do it in 2 heats instead of 4 or whatever it was that I did before. So we'll see how this goes.
So Andrew's done a live demo night of this and talked about this, and I think he said that, I mean, it makes sense that this was like someone's whole job, that they would just make nails all day long.
Yeah, there's special anvils designed just for making nails, and they would make, you know, thousands a day in order to just barely, you know, survive. So that was back in the days when labor was so cheap that something like that would be a viable way forward. Don't need any walls on the inside if it's coated. Oh, yeah, no. Alright, so let's do this here. I'll do one more.
It cools down really fast.
Yeah, there's not a lot of material there, so that helps a lot.
But probably it's still, I mean, you put water on it, so you probably would still burn yourself.
Yeah, I mean, right now it's still, like, you can't hear it, but it's still, like, there's a little bit of a puddle of water here, and it's still sizzling a little bit. But yeah, it does cool down fairly quickly, and this is why you get things like striking while the iron's hot and things like that. There's a lot of what do you call those, idioms, I guess, that are blacksmithing related. So anyway, there's another.
Nick on Facebook was saying that water, he had heard that water was a violent quench or something.
So water is on the faster side of the quenchant spectrum, if you will.
Is that a real word?
The quenchant? Sure. Yeah, I think so. I guess so. Yeah, we'll call it a quenchant. That's fine. Water's on the faster side. There's a lot. You can get really far out in the weeds with it. People have used like lye solutions for quenchant and stuff like that. But the spectrum is basically like a brine solution is going to be your fastest quench, and then an oil solution is going to be your slowest, with air being, I guess, even slower than oil. If you can call air a quenchant, which I guess you kind of can. But yeah, this is all mild steel, so you know, putting it in water isn't going to do anything to it. It doesn't care. Sand would be more like, I don't know, kind of the opposite of that, right? It's going to insulate, which is going to slow down the cooling process, which is useful if you're trying to anneal the steel. If you wanted steel to be very, very, very soft, you would slow it down with perlite, actually, which is what this bin here is.
Is that what anneal means, to slow down, to make it melty?
There's a couple different states of steel and how it interacts, and we can get into it shortly.
Probably.
But the long and short of it is carbon gets trapped around the iron atoms within a molecule, and when it's hot, the carbon gets in between the iron, and then as it cools down slowly, the carbon gets back out. Well, if you can cool it fast enough, the carbon gets stuck in there, and so the carbon's like trying to get the hell out, and the iron's like, no, and so that creates a structure that is harder and stronger. The more carbon you have in the solution of the steel, the harder it can be quenched, to the point where you can, you know, quench it to the point where it fractures even. So. Is that tool only for nail making, or do you use it for other things as well? Yeah. So this tool is exclusively for making of nails. There's no other. There's no other real purpose for it, which is also why it's literally just a piece of bar stock. I made this out of a piece of. I think this was a coil spring off the Jeep. I used to work for a car dealership, and I don't fully understand car culture in any real way, but the first thing people do after they buy a Jeep is take bits and pieces off of it, and then put other bits and pieces back on, because I guess they're better than Jeep makes them. I don't know. So we had a whole bunch of coil springs laying around for that stuff, and so I glommed onto it over the years. I think that's it. Are you guys interested in the streaming setup at all? I don't know if that's a technology
I
thing.
think that's a show and share again, another show and share. You have like a foot thing to switch cameras.
Yeah, so there's a little USB foot switch here that switches between the two.
Yeah, I'd be interested in seeing that.
Okay, well, we can
sometime.
talk about that some other time when it's not so hot and there's not a fire in this building. All right.
Thank you, Andrew. That was really cool.
You're welcome. I hope you guys enjoyed it.
Yes.
We'll see if we can maybe do this again here sometime. We run out of.
Now that the blacksmithing building is almost done.
Mm-hmm. We could do it from that building. It'll be great.
Yes.
Cool. All right. Thank you
so much.
Mm-hmm.
All right, now on to announcements. We're not going to announce COVID this week because everybody knows it and we talk about it all the time. So we are only going to talk about upcoming events, of which we have 3, which is super exciting. Tomorrow night is a new members onboarding for anyone who is interested in membership. If you don't have to be a trial member, you don't have to have signed up for anything. You just, if you're interested about Knox Makers, you want to hear more about how it works and what the benefits and responsibilities are and assets that we have, like things that you can do at the space. If you're interested in that, you can come to the class. All of our classes are listed on knoxmakers.org/events. And then that's where you would sign up. And the new members onboarding is going to be virtual as well. So it's going to be like this format. So you don't need a mic or camera. We would like it if you participated, but if you only can listen to audio, that works too. But if you are a trial member, it's highly, highly recommended. If you're interested in membership, that's a good place to go as well. And that's tomorrow night, free, awesome. It's a good time. Bring your own snacks, unfortunately. And then, oh crap, I don't know the date for this. The date, the next class we have is building coronavirus. See, and now we are talking about coronavirus. We're trying something new. This is on August 5th, which is next Wednesday. We're trying something new. We're doing a build along, but also virtual. So, right, Sue says that tomorrow is the deadline for a ticket for this class because what you're going to do is if you want to solder this blinky coronavirus and then like murder it because we hate coronavirus, you sign up for the class and then we'll mail you a kit and then we're going to go through the soldering and the building of it virtually on here as well. So you solder at home, you need all your supplies, you need a soldering iron and all that stuff, and then we'll send you the kit in the mail. So that's why you have to sign up by tomorrow because we need to mail you the kit. And that class is limited edition collectible commemorative blinky coronavirus. Yes. $15 for members and $25 for non-members, and anyone can sign up. Are they numbered? I don't know. You could like scratch, you could etch on the laser maybe your own number. Is that allowed? I don't know. It should say something like, I hopefully survived coronavirus 2020, something like that. COVID-19, right. And then our next class, we had a FreeCAD intro class, and Brian is coming back generously and going to talk FreeCAD by example. So when the class was sort of getting over, he was going through different projects and showing how he made them. So I'm imagining that this is going to be similar to that. So he's going to take a model like this one in the picture and then show how he made it and like the different options you have and the different tools you have with FreeCAD. And FreeCAD is open source and free for anyone on any platform, which is what all of our software is at Knox Makers. And that is this coming Saturday at
11 a.m.
I don't know. It's at 11 a.m. and it's free for members. and $5 for the general public. So, and again, it's on big blue button, so you don't need any special software. You just need the web link. So if you sign up for that, we'll email you the web link for that on Saturday or shortly before. So we actually, I mean, it seems like this virtual class thing is working out sort of well. If anyone has any feedback on that, we're willing to listen. And if anyone would like to teach a class virtually, that would be great as well. Hosted by limited edition collectible commemorative Brian Manifold. Do you actually get to collect Brian? No? Doesn't seem like it. I guess I would have to talk to Brian about that. He's already been collected. Well, darn it. Okay. So again, if you would like to show something, if you'd like to do a demo like Andrew did, you don't have to have a fancy setup like Andrew. If you just have a laptop camera that you can point to something, or have a friend help you. If you want to do a live demo or show off your shop, or show off something you've made, or show off your photography or your drawings, or anything that you've made, no matter what it is, it doesn't have to be limited to something you could make at Knox Makers. I mean, we show off all kinds of things. So you can message me on Mattermost if you're a member, or if you're not a member and you're from Facebook or from some other makerspace, you can email your photos to sas@knoxmakers.org, and we will contact you and get you on the list when you're available. Otherwise, join us next week, Tuesday at 7 p.m. for another show and share. Thanks for coming. That's all I've got.